Welcome artist, Miss Cascino here. Welcome to our sewing project where we sew a bag. Now in your supplies kit that you picked up from the school, there should be enough materials, buttons, beads, and thread, along with needles to first work on the pouch to learn the stitching, the buttons, and the beads. Second project, this one here, will be creating a bag. So our bag has a handle, it has an opening at the top, it has some fringe at the bottom, and an embellishment. All right, let's talk about what supplies we need to take out of our bag first. All right, artists, let's gather our supplies before we start to make our bag. You'll need a little hot dog threader and a needle. You'll need thread. You'll also need scissors for trimming and cutting. You'll need a few pins for pinning. Doesn't matter what color. You'll need a bead, a button, and maybe a couple brads. These are for your embellishment, your decoration on your bag. A pencil, and I would say grab some scrap felt from your bag. You're gonna wanna use this sparingly, but especially if you're gonna do the stuffy lesson after this, but you should have an extra piece or two in your bag that you can use as scrap fabric. Okay, let's begin. So the first step that we're gonna do is we're gonna work on making our embellishment. Now I have my two pieces of felt, my big felt, stacked on top of each other, and I trimmed it along the edge just to make sure they were even. In a minute, I'm gonna sew this on the right side, the bottom part, and the left side of leaving this top part open for the top of our bag that we put things inside. First, we're gonna make a decoration. Now, I do the decoration first and I sew it to the front flap of my bag before I sew the bag together. It's just easier. So you can kind of freestyle it. I'm gonna make a star. Now, the scissors that you use to cut felt should be pretty sharp. It's very difficult to cut felt with scissors that are not sharp. So see if you can ask a grown-up to borrow some sharper scissors and they can give you a quick lesson on how to use them safely. All right, so I think that I want my embellishment to be a star shape. Yours could be a circle, it could be a square. It could just be kind of a organic blobby shape. It's up to you. It could be a head, it could be an animal. All right, so I'm gonna make mine into a star because I have a star button that I wanna use. So let me see, I'm freestyling this though. I'm not really planning what my star looks like, so it's not gonna be perfect, but I kind of like that it's not gonna be perfect. I like organic freestyle shapes when I'm making my art. And you know what? Sewing is an art. People might call it a craft because you can use sewing to attach a button back to your pants, or you can use sewing to make something that you wear or that you use to keep warm, like a blanket or a quilt. But you know, it's really an art, and people who are good at it and practice a lot make beautiful, beautiful creations. Okay, so this is my crazy star. Looks like a starfish in the ocean. This is gonna be my embellishment. I'm gonna sew this in a minute. But before I sew it to the back piece of the felt, I'm gonna put my decorations on. So if you remember, my my string has a little knot in it, so I'm gonna cut that because it's bugging me and I don't wanna have to pull that through. I'm gonna use that as the bottom knot in my needle thread, okay? So what you're gonna do is you're gonna thread your needle with some thread. Now you can maybe just stick it through like this, but if you're having a tough time, the end is fuzzy, don't forget about our little trick where we take the hot dog threader and we put it right in here like a hot dog into the bun, and we take this and we put it into the needle, the eye of the needle, and then I pull it through. And now I'm not gonna pull it through all the way even Steven. You can do that if you want and tie your knot at the bottom of your thread, but I'm gonna just leave a little tail while I'm sewing. And I pinch it here with my thumb and my forefinger while I'm sewing so that I don't lose my tail. But if I do lose my tail and it goes straight through and unthreads from the needle, that's fine. You just fix it and thread it again. Now I already have a knot at the end of my thread, but you're gonna wanna tie a knot at the end of your thread as well. So before I try to sew my embellishment onto the piece of the front part of my bag, and I want it to be a little crazy and crooked like that, I am first gonna sew my bead and my button on. So here's my star. I want it to go right in the middle. So remember, when we sew a button from our pouch, you stick your needle through where you want your button to be and pull it up until you feel that tug of the knot on the back. Then I thread my button through. Now this button only has 2 holes. Later, we're gonna use the X shape like we would with a button with 4 holes. We're gonna use that later on to attach our handle. So it's good that we learn that with our pouch. Now my dolphin, my needle, is gonna dive back down through the water, and I'm gonna pull it through the back of my embellishment, my star, and I'm gonna pull it until I do 1 stitch. It's basically like you're doing a running stitch, but I don't think 1 stitch is enough to hold it. So I'm gonna do that twice just to make sure it's secure. The way I do it twice is I come back up just like I'm doing a stitch, and if I can't find my hole, oh, I just found it pretty easily, but if I can't, I can move my button to the side and I can come back up through my felt and then just put that right in the hole, okay? You see that? And then I'm gonna pull this through, boop, and then I'm gonna dive back down through the hole to hold that button in a running stitch. There we go. Now there's a lot of different ways you can sew buttons. This is just an easy, quick way. I put 2 stitches in. You could put more if you like, especially if it's holding pants or it's holding a shirt button. Now on the back, I'm gonna go through one of my stitches and take a little bit of felt with me and a mini stitch to tie my knot. I'm gonna pull it through, right? And right before the loop closes and gets flat, I'm gonna stick my needle through to tie my knot. You can also tie the knot by hand, but it's harder than just doing it, oh, you see this almost got caught, so I have to make sure I lift it over the edge of my star and pull it tight. There's my knot. Some people like to do 2 knots just to keep it secure. I'm gonna do that. Yep, see, right before it gets flat, I'm gonna stick my needle through to tie my knot and pull it tight. Now I'm gonna give it a little clip. My button is secure. Okay, now I'm gonna sew my button onto my embellishment. I threaded my needle again, I tied a knot at the end. Now to sew the bead on, just like we did with our pouch, I'm gonna come up through the bottom of my star till I feel that tug. I'm gonna put my bead straight up on my needle, let it drop all the way to the bottom so it's sitting on my felt, on my star. And then I'm gonna go over the edge of my bead and I'm gonna do a tiny little stitch next to where I came up. And I'm gonna come down through the bottom and pull it until my bead is nice and tight. Now, you can have your bead lay on its side, but because it's not, I don't want it to look like an eyeball like I did with the stuffy, so I'm gonna have it tip on its side like this. I like the way that looks. Just kind of adjust it with your finger. Now you're gonna do it twice, just to make sure it's strong. So come up again, make sure it's not through the same stitch because you could unsew what you just did. Then go through your bead, right, and back down into your felt. Okay, make sure that's nice and tight. Going back down under, pulling it. All right, that's nice and tight. You see how my stitch is in there and you can see it on the side and it's coming out through the back. Now I gotta tie a knot so my bead doesn't come undone, my nice stitching. So I'm gonna put my needle through some of that felt, do a little mini stitch underneath the bead so no one can see it on the front. And right before I pull this loop flat, I'm gonna stick my needle through it to tie a knot. It's the same kind of knot you tie when you're tying the first part of your shoe, but you're doing it with your needle instead and a mini stitch. The reason I say mini stitch is because it's a very tiny little stitch and I'm doing it twice now, just so it's a strong knot, and I'm gonna trim it right here. All right, great. So now I got my bead and my star on. I'm gonna add some brads to show you that technique. Okay, let's add some brads. Now, I didn't know what these things were called until I bought them at the store. You can buy them at Michael's Crafting Store in the paper crafting section. I don't think a lot of people use these for felt, but I love the way they look. It's a little tack on the front, like a round piece. You might have one that has a gem in it, or maybe it's shiny and black or metallic. This one happens to be green. Okay. I'm gonna take my needle to make a hole to make it easier to stick this through. You can also use the end of your sharp scissors. So I'm putting my needle through and I'm just gonna wiggle it around to make a hole in my felt. I'm not sewing a stitch, I'm just wiggling it around to make a hole. You see how I punctured and I just made a hole? It's pretty easy. Then you're gonna take your brad and stick the sharp part through. Now on the back, you'll notice that your brad, it's not just one sharp piece like a tack or like a push pin. It actually is two pieces, so you can, with your thumbs, bend them down flat. And that'll keep it from coming off. Okay, and I'm gonna do that for my other side too. I'm gonna take a needle, doesn't matter if there's thread on it or not. I'm gonna wiggle it around to make a little hole, not rip it, but just kind of wiggle it. I'm gonna stick the sharp part of my brad through my hole, make sure both pieces go through, and then I'm gonna flatten it on the back. Now, if you happen to have a tiny, tiny embellishment and you're putting a brad in and these little pieces stick over the edge, you can trim them with scissors. They're actually pretty easy to trim. All right, so that's what it looks like from the back. I have two knots, my button knot, my bead knot, and the brads. And when I flip it, the brads just kind of look like little magical eyeballs. Okay, so now to sew my embellishment onto my bag, and also you could do this, you could sew your eyes and mouth and any other details for your stuffy later before you sew the body. In the video that I made for the stuffy, it's actually, we sew the whole stuffy first and then just end up gluing our embellishments. But you can also do this method to sew them on if you don't want to use any glue or you don't have any at home. Okay, so now my embellishment, I want it to go on the orange. So the way I'm gonna do that so it doesn't move around while I'm sewing it, I'm gonna take a pin. Okay, the pin has a little ball on the top where you can hold it safely. It's very sharp, so be careful, don't stab yourself. Okay, and I'm gonna poke it through just one layer of felt and my star embellishment, and I'm gonna make a little stitch with it to hold it. So I'm gonna take that out later, right? This is just to help me hold it on. I can get rid of this back piece of felt for now so it doesn't get in my way. I'm gonna match it up again later though. So I'm also gonna stick one in on this side. Now to sew my embellishment, I'm going to make tiny little running stitches around the edge. I made it a little hard for myself because it's a star. It might take me a while, but I think it's gonna look cool. So I'm gonna knot my thread at the bottom. It's still threaded on my needle from when I sewed my bead. Here we go. And now I'm gonna speed up the video so you can see me sewing the running stitch around the edge. Okay, so I finished my embellishment. The star has been sewn with the running stitch to the front part of the felt. You can see the back. I'm gonna match up my two pieces of felt. This is gonna be the front of my bag. The green is gonna be the back of my bag. I'm gonna leave this top part open. I'm not stitching it because that's where I'm gonna put things into the bag and put a handle. Now I'm gonna be stitching down the right side of my bag using the running stitch across the bottom and up the left side. Hopefully with one piece of thread, but you can always rethread if you need more. I am going to take a straight edge ruler or you could use a piece of cardboard or a cereal box and draw a line very lightly with a pencil like this, about 1.5 inches, 2 inches up from the bottom. That's going to be my guide where I'm going to sew across the bottom because I'm going to leave a little extra because I want to cut some fringe at the end. And I'll show you how to do that. So as you can see on this bag really quick, I sewed down, across, and up. Okay, and I left this to be cut at the very end. So before I start sewing my edges of my bag, I'm gonna pin it in a few spots, 4 spots. That way my fabric won't slip around while I am sewing. So pretty much 2 sides and 2 corners. But I do it pretty far in. so I don't have to worry about when I'm stitching, it doesn't get stuck on my pin. So I'm gonna start up here. To hide the knot so you don't see it on the back of or front of my bag, I'm gonna start on the inside of one piece of the felt. And I'm gonna come up. Now that's the only time I'm just sewing through one side, okay? Oops, get away there. Now I'm gonna keep sewing and I'm gonna speed up the video so I don't take up too much of your time here, but you're gonna sew the running stitch all the way down the side, all the way across the bottom, and all the way up the left side. Here we go. Okay, now we're gonna put the finishing touches on our bag. I sewed the running stitch down the side, across the bottom, up the top, but I didn't sew this part because that's where I'm gonna put things in to my bag. Before I attach the handle, which I cut from my scrap, okay, and you wanna do it pretty long way. It's about the whole length of this. Or you could do two shorter handles, I'll show you that in a second. I'm gonna take out my pins. I don't need the pins anymore. I use my stitches, and my stitches are actually, I want you to notice how big the stitches are. Then they can be smaller than this even. The important thing is you don't want to do big stitches because you're feeling like you just want to get it done. Because if you do giant stitches and they're not close together like this, things will fall out of your bag. There'll be a hole. So it's very important that you don't do big stitches, do little stitches, okay? And pretty close together. I mean, maybe even the space between is smaller than your pinky, okay? So now I cut my handle from my bag. Now think back to when we sewed our button with the X shape, okay? The button that had 4 holes. We're gonna do the same thing for the handle. Now, if you want your handle to be flat like this, you can have it flat. If you want, you can trim it to be a shape. I'm gonna trim mine to be like a triangle shape to kind of play off the design of my star. There we go. All right, so to attach the handle, you're gonna make sure that you put your fingers into just the front part of your bag, okay? And you're gonna put the tip of your handle over the front part of your bag. You're gonna take a pin and pin it so it doesn't fall off, okay, while you're sewing. Next, you're gonna take your needle and thread it, tie a knot, and my thread is really short right now, but I don't want to waste thread, so I'm going to use it because I only have to do 2 stitches. So I'm going to come up from the back, and I'm not sewing through both layers. I'm just sewing through the orange felt and my handle. I'm going to come up through both layers. I'm going to pull it till I feel my knot, and instead of going across, I'm going to go diagonal. Diagonal means corner to corner. All right, you see that? And I'm only going through the orange. Oops. I need to thread my needle again. See, when you're using short string, that happens, but that's okay. You just thread it again, okay? Now you can see the hole where I went before, so I'm gonna do that again. I'm gonna come through. There's my diagonal stitch. Now I'm gonna come back up next to where I went in the first time. You see that? And now I'm gonna cross back over, diagonally over to make an X and through the blue handle and through the orange layer. There's my X, my handle is on. Now you can do 2 stitches if you want. You're gonna do that to the front and you're gonna do that to the back of your bag, just through the green layer, okay? That way you know, and I'm gonna cut that to be a triangle shape as well, that you have the front and the back of your handle sewn on. Okay, so I sewed my handle on the front and the back. Now I can carry it, okay? The top part of my bag is open. I can put things in it. The only last finishing touch I'd love to do, oh, and I wanted to not forget to tell you that you have to knot your string on the back of each time you sew the X for the handle. That'll keep it nice and strong. Now, cutting the fringe, I wanna make sure that I don't cut into my stitching because then it will all fall apart. So I'm gonna use the sharp part of my scissors, deep in the part of my scissors, okay? And I'm gonna control my cuts so that they stop probably a 1/4 inch from my stitching, just so I don't risk it. And I'm gonna do a bunch of little cuts like this. Now when I cut the stitching, is safe because I'm not getting near it. If I cut too close and I cut into that, the thread will start to unravel. So as you can see, and you'll see behind, now that I can use my fingers, you see how I have the green behind, and it's a nice little decoration. So you're gonna cut the rest of your fringe and you will be finished with your bag. All right. Now fringe you can cut on a lot of different things, so it's a good skill to know, and it's pretty easy. All right, my last little fringy bit. Okay, if you make a mistake and you cut off a piece of the fringe, it's no big deal. No one's gonna notice. Only you will notice, okay? That's the same with most art. A lot of the mistakes that you think you made, no one will ever notice because they didn't know you planned to do it that way. All right, so you'll see my fringe, my embellishment, my handle with the X stitch, my bag. Thank you so much, artists. If you have enough materials left in your bag, join me for the stuffy. Bye.